Hey guys, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture. Nick is with me today, and we're talking about some articles that I would say discovered, but I purposely looked for them because I know they would be lurking, give me some material to talk about. But articles that talk about tips for basically how to be quote unquote healthy enough, and with the underlying message of being thin enough and good enough when we start going back to restaurants, like referring to post-COVID and like people going back to work and maintaining fitness routines, and just some of the like red flags for why that's some toxic and disordered information and advice to follow, and some of my thoughts as a dietitian on like why we don't have to, specifically breaking some of those things down. And yeah, can't wait for you to give it a listen. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Dan. How's it going?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm really tired. Going on vacation soon, but I'm good.
Oh, you're going on vacation. I thought that was a work thing. That's exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Okay, so today I want to talk about some of the nutrition advice that's floating around, specifically in relation to like re-entering the world and going back to dining in restaurants. Every now and then I like to do a little Google search just with like words like healthy eating or just nutrition. Because I'm curious what kind of like trash is going to come up. There are some good and important and helpful things that come up as well, but for the sake of squashing diet culture, we got to talk about the issues that are living on the internet regarding food. So there were 3 different articles that came up immediately within the first 2 pages of searching for healthy eating, and they all had a trend. I think they all have been written within the past month or 2. So basically, I want to preface with saying that as a dietitian, and I've talked a lot about this in the interviews that I've done, especially with other RDs, how we are indoctrinated into this field of just things being very exclusive and very black and white, and there's good and there's bad with nutrition, and that's what diet culture is, right? So as a healthcare professional, we're going to buy into that stuff because it's what we're being taught. That's how we're going to help people. And I used to believe these things for myself. I followed them, I taught them. And now when I read things like that, all I can see is like really toxic information and disordered behavior. So I want to point some of that out through my lens, just to give an alternative perspective on some really like classic information. I wouldn't even know where to begin guessing, but there's so many articles that exist like this. This is like typical advice for going out to eat. And so I know people were getting takeout. I think that's the thing with nutrition articles, is that they're there to be something interesting. And so there's always going to be something current or trendy to take and like blow way out of proportion. Or like you could take an article, write an article about blueberries and just make it like the good, the bad, and the ugly about blueberries, but really like contextually in your life, is it really that serious? Anything about blueberries? Probably not. So if I'm saying that advice like this isn't helpful, I think it's important for me to provide like what advice would I give. So I'm just going to start talking through some of these bullet points, and I can put the links to these articles in the show notes of this episode just for reference, but there's specific quotes and things that I'm going to pull out to discuss. Okay, so this is a quote. Restaurant food is delicious for a reason. It's typically full of salt, sugar, saturated fat, and refined grains like white flours, bread, or pasta. End quote. So what I want to say to that is the way this sentence is written is making these things sound really like big, hairy, scary, can't touch that, it is not acceptable. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying the foods that are within these different components. And it's not reasonable to set out to avoid all added salts, sugars, saturated fat sources, and refined grains from your diet. So I find it curious, like, why do we have to do that when we go out to a restaurant? It's because we need something to be scared of to buy into diet culture. And these are some really common components that get such a bad rap in a really unfair way. I can think of times where I was so appalled by there being like sugar in pasta sauce, and I learned that my husband Matt, when he makes them, he adds carrots into it just because that was his family's recipe. But do you know what carrots provide? Actually, some like sugars to make it taste a little bit better. And so, certainly, I understand there's concern about any refined sugar in the diet. And I'm also a dietitian sitting here telling you I think like it's okay. Um, but we get scared out of thinking it's something that's allowable and get really angry about being in our food. And I think it's important just to come back to the fact that like it is in the food to taste good. And while you can still, if you're in a place where this isn't overly triggering, you can consider the amount of these things that are in your diet and have variety. And like they're there because they taste good. And that is not inherently bad or evil or going to cause negative health impacts. Um, so listing things like this, and then it's typically backed up with like to lower the risk of disease. That really goes in on this single meal is going to make or break our health. And then that's really reinforcing that whole concept of I've been good or I've been bad and I need to do something to compensate, or I need to change what my eating patterns are tomorrow, or I need to change what I'm going to eat before I go into this meal because I know I'm going to be bad, quote unquote. And I think this is really just dangerous and misguided information, because if we can step back and give ourselves like permission to be intuitive human beings, which we've really, for the most part, come away from because of all the advice like this and all the outside information that tells us what we can and cannot do all the time. But it's not normal to only want these foods like exclusively forever. So you're bound to have variety at some capacity. I'm sure there's a couple caveats to this, but for the most part, I think that's safe to say, and it's normal. And so when we put salt, sugar, saturated fat, refined grains, like avoid them to lower the risk of disease together, it's adding that extra layer that isn't really accurate information, because like there's other foods involved and it's not super realistic, I don't think, to assume that's all we're eating, except for maybe in the case of having food insecurity and some of those foods are more accessible. And that really makes me further upset, because that's really going in on a group of people who are just trying to get by. And so to like use that and be like, oh, well, it's going to be your fault if you end up having negative health impacts because you don't have access to eating a variety of foods, that's completely unfair. And we're not even remotely touching the root of the problem. But I think these articles are not written to that population, because if that's happening, that's like getting what's available to survive, right? But these articles are more written towards people who have access to like go to whatever restaurants and to do all these different things. And so we're just having several completely different conversations, honestly, but that's what writes really good articles, is like fear mongering. And just I'm sure that most people that write these don't even have that awareness that it's like, oh, I'm like actively contributing to diet culture. Ha ha ha. Like, it's not like that. It's just what we believe. And it's just so ingrained in us. Do you have any thoughts? I'm monologuing over here.
No, you're good. I agree. I think if anything, it's more impactful to those in the lower income bracket because then it's like I remember when I wasn't uh, like when I was there, I would eat out like I don't know rarely, and so you really like it's a bigger event, so you hinge more on it. So if anything, it just like it hits home even more because of that.
Yeah, and I want to put in that reminder that in that scenario, I'm only talking about nutrition being a contributor to health, and we know that that is not the sole contributor. So even then, in that argument, that's still carrying a little bit more weight than I think it should, and that more than talking more about the things that are probably a little bit less important than some of the broader issues in that situation. Okay, so another common tip that we get is asking your server for substitutions. Um, and there's like wording around most servers are more than happy to help you, blah, blah, blah. And I just want to say, as someone who worked as a server for a few years, like, no, we don't. Like, no one likes receiving substitutions to orders, especially when we're not talking like we're not at Jimmy John's here or Subway. Like, this is not a made to order situation. Like, it's actually quite obnoxious to be asking for all these different exceptions. And I think like that's really disordered to not be able to just order something off the menu. And I'm not talking if you have like a food allergy or a legitimate sensitivity or like a strong, like, I hate tomatoes. Can I not have a tomato on this kind of thing? Like, I'm talking when you're so concerned about not eating too many calories or ordering something unhealthy, quote unquote, that like you have to take time to pick apart someone's culinary creation to make yourself feel better about one single meal. Oh, goodness. I'm getting
Yeah,
heated.
I thought I was. I'm glad you came back there for a sec. I thought we were gonna have to have some like pitchforks at us because I was like, oh no, like the poor people who just like don't like food are like, oh SMH, tragic. But no, you made the exception there, so that is good. That's good because I'm really lucky to like not have any. There's like I like a lot, so like when I order something, like I have no restrictions, so I have,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying. And so it's awful because I understand how embarrassing it can be to have to if you have a dietary restriction or something to have to order and have them make exceptions and stuff. I know for some people it can be really awkward.
Yeah, and by no means am I wanting to like add shame to someone who has to do that. It's really poking at diet culture and like these articles recommending that we do that when it's not necessary because like those meals are created to taste the way that they're designed on a menu, like for a reason. So,
So some of them became standards though, and some of these in particular are also standards for a dietary restricted population, which is beautiful,
mhm,
and I love that. I want to see more of that. But the like uh, lettuce on sandwiches instead of
mhm,
bread, like that one became standard. And while
mhm,
I hope that's just for like the gluten allergy peeps, I think a lot of that was
mhm.
for the Diet Culture peeps. I mean, it does kinda it's a totally different vibe, so for my
Yeah,
peeps who just eat that because it tastes unique, like, uh, there's that too, but, like, a lot of menus that's a big one that I think has become a staple on all, like, burger places and restaurants.
yeah,
And then, I don't know, the thing I'm seeing less of, and maybe it's just because 'cause I'm not flipping through menus well, but the thing I think I'm seeing less of is the good old 500 calorie or fewer section on menus,
Hmm.
or the 1,000 calorie or fewer section on menu. I feel like it was always rounded to one of those numbers. It was
Yeah,
never but
I can't recall. I feel like it's been a second since I've gone to a chain restaurant, like, in person, that would I would have looked at that on the
and
menu, but
maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's that I haven't eaten at, like, a TGI Fridays,
yeah.
and the
I
local places don't do it as much.
I think you have to have a certain number of restaurants in your chain or whatever,
Yeah.
your organization, your business, in order to have that information provided, like, publicly.
Oh, got you.
Mhm. I don't know what the current law is, if that's what it was the last time I looked at it.
Got you.
But yeah, I'm really not trying to go in on anyone who's making those substitutions for, like, what I would consider non-disordered reasons, but the whole point of this podcast is to talk about diet culture and really point out the things, because I think if you heard that and you're like, like, I do make substitutions because I am worried about calories, or it's like, well, just like, what would that be like to not do that? What would that experience be like? It's just something to be curious about. And I just think it's like really shit advice from dietitians or nutrition professionals, or whoever is writing these articles, to like say things like that, because it's just promoting problematic eating. Some other advice that was given is the 90-10 rule, and this really like makes me roll my eyeballs into the back of my head, because I used to tell people this before my days of understanding the problems. So basically, the 90-10 rule is focusing on eating quote unquote healthy, clean, nutrient dense foods 90% of the time, and then 10% of the time you can eat whatever you want, aka eat the bad, unhealthy foods. So that gave you balance, which is still like, I used to break this down. This makes me so sad, but I used to break this down. Like, if you eat 5 or 6 times a day, this is X number of meals in your week that you don't have to eat perfectly in order to still be following the 90-10 rule. And that just really sucks, because that is so rigid. Um, but it's
That's
a really
the
common, huh?
that's the equivalent of if you're starting, like, a government, you just implement the purge rule.
Oh my gosh.
Just you know what I'm saying? That's just goofy, is all from
I
my
know.
standpoint.
But the thing is it's like, it's one of those easy rules to follow, because it's like, "Oh, well, I can indulge, but I don't have to feel guilty about it, because I can do this bloop, bloop, bloop X number of times in the week, and still I'm 90% healthy." And it's just like, it really has no real basis, and then you're forced to literally label foods as good or bad if we're gonna play that game. And I
It's
am very far removed from believing that's acceptable information to provide someone. So just something to consider as a red flag, and not actually helpful information. Okay, so another thing that really drives me up the wall is encouraging eating mindfully in order to eat slower and therefore consume less calories. So I really get irritated by when diet culture co-ops any sort of mindfulness to help you, like, not gain weight, because actually mindful eating is a really important piece of a healthy relationship with food. And often, if there's any kind of disordered anything going on, that's going to be a step like a little bit later, because really, like, connecting with the food and fully having that experience can be really, like, anxiety provoking and even triggering when you have had a negative relationship with food. And so to just like make it be this thing that has to happen with the side effect of not eating enough, I worry that if we're just like saying that, we aren't actually paying attention to our hunger and fullness cues and like our overall needs. We're just like using this as a buzzword to like eat really slow and like pat ourselves on the back about it.
I mean, yet again, that's a misuse of the word mindfulness. Mindful eating is literally just intuitive eating,
Yeah,
from my
it
perspective.
it's like, yeah, there's like different, it varies slightly, because like mindfulness has kind of a background rooted in like you can I've seen different books and practitioners relate it to like Buddhism and like some different practices of like meditation, but I think um intuitive eating isn't just mindful eating, but I do think that they're like in a Venn diagram, there's a big chunk in the middle where those two things 100% overlap, but not for the purpose of diet culture reasons of trying to like eat less food. That's not what that's for.
It's not mindful.
No, it's really not. Because like there's that goes even further. Like I've seen advice of like chew X number of times before you swallow your food in order to slow down. Like it real and that like I think those would all be listed in the same category because that's the whole point of this, but it's not effective. And if you eat really slowly, like just for the purpose of it, and then like you may feel satisfied momentarily, but you may not have actually like consumed an appropriate amount of food. So like yes, there could be value in like eating a slower meal, but like I feel like I'm a relatively quick eater and it gets me around just fine. And so the mindfulness is not as simple as it sounds
I
in
mean,
this, and
that's,
it's just
to me
it's not appropriate for the practice of mindfulness.
it's a textbook, like, they're just stealing a buzzword from something that's
Yeah.
really hot and popping and good for you, and just stealing it and implementing it and not even understanding the concept at all. So, triggered.
All right. Another tip was to avoid upsells, to not consume too many calories. So basically like adding extra loveliness to your meal to avoid eating more food.
This
And
one I
I
really like because duh, like,
oh, like if you're trying to give advice to eat less, like don't get more food.
yeah.
Yeah. I know.
No, I get it. I get why they're making that point and stuff, but that one cracked
Yeah.
me up specifically.
Yeah.
Continue.
Um and again, sometimes some of these things are like I always feel like I need to give a disclaimer that I'm not saying things like this because I think people are just like general idiots. And I think sometimes when these articles are written, it's like, oh, Hal, do you think people just have literally no clue about anything? And you're just completely removing their ability to be like autonomous, intelligent, intuitive beings. And I like to give people that like ability rather than just thinking no one knows anything. But yeah, so practice practicing honoring yourself with satiety, so like being satisfied is actually like so important when you're reconnecting with your body and trying to like leave some of this garbage behind, and you're way more able to tune into what you're wanting and needing um once you get a little bit more seasoned in this practice of being more intuitive and actually allowing that. And so I think if we didn't just like follow these quick written rules and actually gave permission to just follow more of that, we would be a lot more capable of deciding like, do we need to order this extra thing or do I think I'll be satisfied here? And sometimes we're going to get it wrong and like need to ask for more food or take some leftovers home or whatever because we misjudged. But if we actually allow ourselves to eat the food that we enjoy, it really helps with that healing. And I know there's always a lot of advice about like just eat the dessert now because if you don't then you're going to eat three other things before you consume it. And that probably is true, but like my point is not to like avoid eating too much in order to get to the thing that you actually enjoy. So yeah, it's not advice to avoid eating. It's to really like try and reconnect with your body. Um More tips and tricks that we get are things like it's okay to not eat a vegetable at or sorry, I'm giving my advice. They did not write
I
that
was
in this
gonna
article.
say,
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. What they wrote is that you need to opt for the entrees that offer more vegetables because we know that vegetables provide less calories than some counterparts you may find on the plate. And so I want to remind people that it is okay to not eat a vegetable at all meals. I think that's like normal for that to not happen sometimes, but we're really like taught to freak the F out when that isn't there because we're like, oh, that's not balanced. And it's like, really, our body does not look at vitamins and minerals that intensely on a day-to-day basis. So we need to like calm down a little bit around that because it's not that serious. Especially if any of this is causing stress. And I think it's probably safe to say that the people reading articles like this, and I'm speaking from like past experience, are the ones that feel a little stressed out about their nutrition and pretty bought into diet culture.
I would say you are correct as well.
Thank you. So another article that popped up in my quick little search was about how this person like wrote in a question. I guess I got so fit working from home. How do I stay in shape and healthy when I return to the office? And I know this is taking a slightly different direction from talking about like the nutrition part, but I think this is really important too because there's these expectations that seem to have been set during the COVID times, especially of when um, the mandatory like stay at home orders and things like that, and people were really, really isolated. And I know not everyone is in the clear from this. So I guess, speaking to this from my like current lived experience in my area and what I've had access to. Um, but there has been this push for like either laugh at how you've gained weight and how unhealthy you are and how you like can't have a hot girl summer, or there's this like I have really dove into like being my best self because of this extra time I've had being in lockdown, and then the fear that's going to come up around implementing regular like life things that were happening before and losing some of that. And I think that's a really slippery slope with our beliefs about like nutrition and fitness and our bodies. Um, because one, I think work life balance can be really problematic. So, like, if it's something that matters to you, I think that's important. And it's like, okay, so like what kind of sacrifices are you willing to make, or do you feel like you have to make in order to like maintain this amount of physical activity that you were doing when you weren't in the office and didn't have those added responsibilities? And I think that just gets kind of like that just gives me those red flags because it's like, well, there's different phases of our life, so like we don't have to maintain the same fitness level forever and ever. And I know that there are people where exercise is not like a disordered or triggering thing, and there's athletes, and so I kind of speak to this from a little bit of a different perspective, but just trying to be like protective of people not having to feel like they've failed if like they were able to do something at one point and they're not able to do it anymore, because then we start talking about things like, oh, well, if you're determined enough or blah, 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 you're going to do the thing. And then, like, basically saying you're lazy if you're not doing it. And there's so much of that out there. I really just don't think this is like a helpful thing um, to be having conversations about. I think like finding self-care balance in your life, this could be something that if movement is important to you, um, in this way, but like saying I got so fit working from home, how do I stay in shape and healthy when I return to the office? It's just like ugh, we're really jumping ship to like a completely different extreme and really reinforcing more of that black and white thinking of I can either be super fit because I'm able to work out for X number of hours a day, or I'm unhealthy suddenly because I have to go back to work. And I just don't think that's very fair and very much tied into like diet culture expectations and being really fat phobic. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Um, no, I mean the same. I mean, I don't know what's the coronavirus for those that you know didn't for what I would call the really privileged people that it only
Yeah.
affected their schedule. Um, like yeah, and it affected mine too. And like, what do you think would happen? And so life is going to change a lot either way. So to me, I'm out of diet culture. I'm like, duh about the whole. It's a big shift. It's a big shift both
Mhm.
ways. I enjoy the like seeing how it changed everybody in a way because I think everybody went in and came out different depending on geography and a few other things. But like I don't know. I'm not with the whole like and ironically it's coming out right before like you said hot girl summer and ironically we did a whole
Mhm.
podcast on that and threw it in the trash. But like yeah, I'm with you. Just take it one stride at a time. Stop holding that stuff over your head. Um and that's a huge that's just if you did like if you're like me and you had literally all day doing nothing, and one of the things you would do was, like, work out every day so that you spent less time banging your head against a wall, like, and then now you're doing other things, like,
Mhm.
okay, like, okay, figure it out, or look at your schedule, like, don't hold it over your head,
Mhm.
and that's tough for me too, and I understand the thing,
Mhm.
because one of the reasons I like to work out is to stretch my legs out because my lower back gets really tight, and I do some stuff to stretch my legs out, and my back is really tight right now. And so one of the things I could do is walk into my office and make the comments to all of my coworkers that I'm not doing good and that I'm a bad person and that I'm horrible and worthless, or I can try and stop myself from making those comments and be a little mindful about the complex that I'm starting for myself
Yeah.
and do what I can and restart because it's literally two restarts. You're on the second end of another one or the beginning of another one. You know, come back to your mind, come back to your body a little bit and don't stop holding things over your head so drastically. And and just because other people hold things over their head, don't let it be held over your head. I understand how much of a norm it is. Like at least in every circle of my life,
Yeah.
it's if you eat something and you don't make a comment about how everything is bad, like you're wild. You're absolutely on an island for that. But like, you know, don't do it. Don't succumb to that.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so yeah, Nick was alluding to, well, you weren't alluding. You should have said that we had like talked about this whole episode about like hot girl summer. And I think this was just like, I know it is mid July already. So if people were feeling the pressure to look a certain way before summer or beach season, we're kind of in the midst of that. And I just want to offer that reminder of like, I've seen so many times on my Instagram feed this year, like more than ever before, of like everybody is a bikini body. And like, all you need to do is have a body and put a bikini on it and things like that. And just like remembering that it is possible for your worth to not be defined by what your body looks like, um, if you choose to work on that. And I'm not saying that there are not barriers, because there most certainly are, especially depending on what your how your body exists. And it's just this unnecessary pressure and distraction that we put on ourselves every single year when if you're living in a warm climate or going on vacation and wearing less clothes, and these articles just happen to be coming out right in that same exact time, and it just is such a big reminder of how much our culture values being as thin as possible over so many other things. And it's just really unfortunate, because that's, like, not what I wanna be thinking about of, like, coming out of COVID, so to speak, is, like, that's the only thing that matters, is what our physical bodies look like, because there's just so much more that's happening. And that's not, meant to place judgment on anyone who's in that place, but really to just, like, reflect from standing outside of being in the thick of diet culture and being an eating disorder dietitian and someone who really cares about helping people heal their relationships with food, just reflecting on how toxic a lot of this stuff really comes across and why it's not helpful or fair or honestly even useful information. I think it's what's trendy, it's what's sexy, and that's what's gonna sell. Because ultimately, we know that the diet industry is $72 billion. Like, there's a benefit to this, um,
I mean,
from a lot of places on top of
yeah.
our culture, sorry,
No, I was just
being
gonna say it's even bigger too. It's not even just 72 billion. Like I walk down like the grocery aisle, like you know how much seltzers are popping off right now? I understand there is like an altruism to
oh my god,
seltzers,
the,
but
like,
like it's
alcohol
also the
ones.
reason that hard seltzers were made
Yeah.
is because it's alcohol, which is like a historical diet culture no-no in terms of like what would be the term like bad calorie empty calories.
That's
Um,
actually one of the points on, one of these articles. It says "Drink smart."
empty calories.
Yeah.
6 gallons of water a day. But anyways, the hard seltzers alone are like that's its own multi-billion dollar industry, and I did fact check that. But like
I
I'm just if you've ever been to a grocery store, you know what I'm talking about right now. That
Yeah,
like not even just the diet industry is like every single. So, anyways, that's a big random point. But I just wanted to talk about hard seltzers when hot girl summer.
um, I'm, like, rolling over here because when I pulled up that article to, like, double check that I was right that they were talking about drinking smart, this sentence says, "Sugary or alcoholic drinks can rake in a lot of extra calories, leaving us feeling tired and sluggish," and I'm just imagining, like, if you poured a whole bunch of seltzers, like, raking is for, like, scraping things off of the ground into a pile, and I'm just imagining all this, like, liquid seltzer, and you're raking it and nothing is happening, and that's because, like, this is a bunch of bullshit.
That's a
Like,
good metaphor.
try raking a puddle of water, and you tell me if it was successful, and then I'm gonna tell you, well, that's how I feel about all of this advice.
I mean, very fair. Nailed it. Touche.
Oh my god. I mean, sugary alcoholic drinks are probably gonna make you feel tired and sluggish because you're gonna have a hangover and you're not gonna sleep properly, and that's why you're gonna be tired and sluggish, like
Yeah, actually give me a call if no alcoholic beverage, makes you tired or sluggish, no matter its sugar content. Please give me a ring.
like, it's a depressant, it puts you to sleep eventually. So, I will digress from this sentence that I'm
Thank
very aggressively attacking. But it's infuriating, so thank you for bringing up seltzer because I think this was important to touch on.
I think it's just a funny one. I think it's a pinnacle of, like, a necessity, right? Like you need to be at the beach. You need to be drinking alcohol. So you need to do it with hard seltzers and anyways.
And like looking a certain way because that's how it's all advertised. So even if we don't believe that, like it in my brain, that's all associated because those are the images that are constantly being fed to us.
Yeah. No, like the yeah, we talked about Corona ads recently, or maybe it was on the episode that we
It
threw
might
away.
have been.
But the Corona ads specifically, I am like stereotype, 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 stereotype. Also,
Yeah.
have you met the people who drink Corona, but stereotype. Anyways,
Oh, okay. I feel I feel resolved after yelling about raking liquid off the ground.
that typically does it for me.
Uh yeah, but seriously, just extending compassion if this stuff feels like something you have to abide by, and offering a space for some curiosity around if this is necessary or not. And I hope some people are like screaming along with me while they listen to this podcast because you're just as irate about it. Um, but yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. And we will talk to you soon.
So yeah.
Thank you for listening. Diet Culture is co-produced by myself and my brother, Nick Lewis. You can keep up with what's going on with Diet Culture on my Instagram page at Dietitian Dani Cast. If you prefer to watch rather than just listen, check us out on YouTube, and we always love ratings and reviews if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for your support, and can't wait to talk to you next week.